All right, guys, it's Monday and we are picking up on a new week. And yeah, so just to recap where we went yesterday, we were in the second temptation that Jesus faced while in the wilderness with the devil. Um, and we were in Matthew chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. And so just to kind of go through that one more time, that was the devil taking him. And again, we whether it was a physical transportation or if it was in a vision or whatnot, we're not actually told specifically how that happened. Um, but nonetheless, Jesus is taken up to the highest point of the temple, and he's immediately tempted again with the same phrase, mind you, "If you are the Son of God," just like he did with, if you're the Son of God, then tell these or turn these stones into bread and relieve yourself of this whole situation. And the devil starts off there again. "If you are the Son of God," then he said, "then throw yourself down." And then the devil quotes Psalm 91. He says, this is a psalm that is not as far as I know, and I could be wrong on this. So don't, again, always test things you hear. Please do that. Um, but I don't believe I remember Psalm 91 being a messianic psalm. And so what this is just the psalmist writing about God's provision for his people, about anyone who takes shelter in the abode or the under the shadow of the Most High, and finds their provision and protection in God Himself. And so the devil, it seems like he's just taking this general promise and saying, like, if you're the Son of God, then this absolutely should apply to you plus some. And so let's take it, let's up the ante a little bit. And so he quotes Psalm 91 after telling him to like throw himself off from the tallest point of the temple, which could have been like close to like 450 feet. We're talking for that kind of drop. And so the devil tempts Jesus. He quotes scripture, trying to manipulate it to get his way done. And Jesus answers back also with scripture, and he says, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." And that's from Deuteronomy 6:16. And we looked a little bit about, like, if you go back to Deuteronomy 6:16, it is Moses reflecting back, and he says, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test like you did at Massa." And that's in Exodus 17, if you want to keep taking the jumping points, I guess, from Matthew to Deuteronomy and Deuteronomy to Exodus and stuff like that. That's kind of where we talked about. That's where we were. And I was also brought to my attention a little bit that it's probably a good idea to recap what I mean when I'm talking about the collapse of a kingdom, because I think I just think it would be good. So just real quick, this one might be a little bit longer. Hopefully not. I'm going to try to talk through this quickly, and I'm going to keep my eye on the time. So I'm at 3 minutes. Cool. To have a kingdom, you need at least three things, or you need three main things to form a kingdom. You have to have a people, you have to have a place, and you have to have a rule. So whether that's a ruler or a rule, or as in a law or anything like that, you have to have these three things to have a kingdom. And so what I'm referring to when I say kingdom at this point is the motivating factor behind why you do things, or the reason for which you do things to get to. So what I'm saying is if your kingdom is good health, for example, then the things that you do are all going to be motivated by that end goal and that motivating factor behind you. Does that make sense? So, I mean, I guess you can't answer that right now. But if you're listening to this in your car or in somewhere right now, just say yes. That's fine. If anybody's around you, they will have no idea why unless they're listening as well. And that will give you a good laugh, hopefully. You're welcome. So now let's take that lens and go back a little bit. We started with this, with the first one about the preparation for the wilderness. And Jesus at his baptism, he's being affirmed by his identity. "You are my son, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased." And then we moved into the wilderness, and we called this past week, the week before, and we're calling next week each the collapse of a kingdom, parts 1, 2, and 3. And so with that, we looked at the temptation to turn stones into bread, because Jesus has been in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights with no food, the temptation for him to turn stones to bread. And we looked at this and we called this the kingdom of self-preservation. And really, we could have called this a number of things. Another one, especially because of the motivating factor of fear, we could have called it the kingdom of fear. And so, what I've been trying to do, and what we've been doing as a church community, is we've been looking at the temptation of Jesus and the stories, especially in the season of Lent, and we've been trying to pay attention to what kind of things are present that Jesus is resisting, that the tempter is trying to lure into, saying, hey, this is a good reason. This is a good motivating factor for you to do this. And I've been trying to single out and point at things that we still struggle with today. Like, the devil tempts us each with these things. And so for that turning stone into bread temptation, the kingdom of self-preservation, like a lot of us, if we're being honest, and if we're not, then like I think we can tell if you're lying, we do things for self-preservation. We go to work even if we don't want to make money for a paycheck, to buy food and to provide and pay the bills so we have a home to live in. We don't do certain things like jump off 450-foot cliffs without any kind of like parachute or bungee cord or anything like that. Like, I was with the kids this week, and we talked about that, and then it was really funny. One of the kids was like, ooh, with a bungee cord. And I was like, yes, but Jesus doesn't have that. So in this story, he doesn't have that. And so, but regardless, like, there's things you just don't do because you know they will end well for you. And so the kingdom of self-preservation reigns there. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that all self-preservation things are bad, but the temptation to give your allegiance to, and everything that you do be fueled and for that kingdom, can become bad and does become bad. Okay. So this past week, with the temptation to throw himself off of the highest point of the temple and call the angels, or have the angels come catch him and help him to not hurt himself. We looked at the kingdom, number one, the kingdom of insecurity, of like leaning into that. Like, okay, do I really believe, like, Jesus, do you really believe your identity? Do you really believe that if you were God's son and you were loved and God enjoyed being with you, that you would be out here in this wilderness by yourself? Come on, God. Come on, Jesus. Like, I could hear that maybe going there. So the kingdom of insecurity leading, like, well, maybe I do need to test this. Maybe I do need to do this just to make sure that God still loves me. That's the temptation that we hear, that we face, the kingdom of insecurity. And so it moves us to do things to test that. And then you had the other side of the kingdom of presumption. You could say arrogance there too, but the idea of presumption is that you just accept it without even testing it. And so don't twist the words here and go back and say, well, now you're saying test the Lord your God. That's not what I'm saying. But like, presumption is, I think of it in the sense of arrogance. I am a big deal, and I expect God to treat me this way. I expect him, and I demand that he does this for me, and anything like that. There's this temptation of the kingdom of presumption, that if you go too far the opposite way of insecurity, this kingdom now reigns. And I see this temptation prevalent in this culture, in this world, so much. So this past week, we looked at those two kingdoms. And that's what I mean by kingdom. Okay, so that's if that helps, I hope that really helps. And I took a little bit of time to make sure I did that, because we're going to revisit yet another kingdom this coming week, and then the next week on Palm Sunday, we're going to look at the rise of a better kingdom. And then on Easter Sunday, we'll look at the call, or the invitation of the King himself. So there you go. Sneak peek. If you're listening to this podcast, you already have a glimpse of where we're going for the rest of this series. So that's what we talked about this past Sunday. Jesus trusts his Father, and he sets the example of how to trust, of saying, like, true, genuine trust doesn't need to be tested. And I'm not going to presume and put the Lord our God to the test like they did at Massa. And so the presumption side really comes, if you don't know, if that's not sinking in or connecting well for you, go back and check out Exodus 17 with the water from the rock. And that was a big deal, because Moses reflects on that in Deuteronomy 6, my bad, verse 16. And so there's one more verse that actually, this is the cool thing. This is why I love the Gospel of Matthew so much. It has grown as one of my absolute favorites of the four that we have in the Bible, especially the Synoptics. It used to be Luke, and there's still a thing in there that I really like Luke, but Matthew is just grabbed my attention so much over the past decade. But what Matthew does is you see a parallel between Jesus's life here, not only with the Old Testament, yes, but then Jesus's life, then up through chapter 4, you have the Sermon on the Mount 5 through 7, and then the rest of Matthew, you see connections from his approach to his identity and his baptism, to his time in the wilderness, and then also with the Sermon on the Mount, all the rest of the book of Matthew. And so it's masterfully crafted and put together. And so I every time I read it, I'm just drawn to it. I just really love it. But there's a verse coming near the end of the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 26, verse 40 and 41. And this is what I want to read to you today and kind of give you the chew on this a little bit. And notice a little bit. I'm trying to remember exactly. Maybe I put the wrong verse here, because as I'm just glancing at this real quick, I think I meant a different one. I think this one was in my mind. This is in real time. So there you go. You can have that. But yeah, I think maybe I did this last week. I don't know. I'll share them both. How about that? The verse, chapter 26, verse 40 and 41. I do think this is good. I do remember thinking through this and writing this out to share. But in chapter 26, this is when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and picking up at verse 40, it's Matthew writes, then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping, and he says, couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And this is the connection I thought of when I was thinking of this passage. Is you have Jesus here in the wilderness with no food or water, and probably feeling it. I mean, the first temptation was turn stone to bread, and now you have here in the end, his disciples are lack of sleep, and Jesus is saying, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I'm not going to draw out and make all the connections there. Actually, I'm not going to read the other one. I'll share it with you just real quick. I didn't pull it up here, but I also think of when he's hanging on the cross and the taunting, and I think I shared this last week, the taunting of the people around him. If you are the Son of God, then come down off that cross. Come down off the cross if you are the Son of God. And so like there's right there, that accusation, that testing, that tempting of like, prove yourself is there in the wilderness and there at the end. And so, but like I said, I think I shared that last week. If I didn't think about that connection, but I really want you to think about this instance in the Garden of Gethsemane, that Jesus draws a connection between, hey, there's going to be seasons, or there's going to be times, especially like in maybe certain days or whole seasons of wilderness, of maybe it's a lack of food, maybe it's a lack of sleep, and like your spirit's going to be willing, but your flesh is still going to be weak, and there's going to be a struggle there. And so he encourages Peter especially, and he says, and I actually encourages his other disciples that are there too. It's in the plural. But he says, you guys need to watch and pray. And I think, what would it look like for us to watch and pray today, so that we do not fall into temptation, that these kingdoms don't lure us away from the kingdom of Jesus. And so I know I've been going to this a while, so I'm going to stop and let you guys process through that. And I hope you guys have a great rest of this day. I'm sorry this is coming out late. I'm going to work on the other ones and get these all scheduled out. So hopefully they'll be there for your morning routine if that's when you listen to this. So take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.